You're always fantastic on these sort of stats, pulling them apart and looking at the significance. And just talk first of all, we've got the massive issue of the huge number more people who are going to come and live in this country, according to these projections. By the way, legally, so I mean, if we don't want them, surely the government could stop that from happening. But the government is obsessed, Labour and Tories, obsessed for years with the idea that you need to import people to do jobs. Somehow growth is delivered by having more people in the country. But prediction of an extra 5 million people from 22 to 32, only 7 years away, and 6 million increase by 2040, realistically. But it could even be more than that. What impact does that have on us?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things here, Julia. So on the net migration figures, basically all of the growth. So I think a lot of the headlines were focusing on 2022 to 2032 yesterday. But if you can just take the 2024 numbers out of 2040, you're right, a 6 million increase. But actually, all of that increase and a little bit more is net migration, because over the next 15 or 16 years, we'll see kind of a decline in the population through natural replacement. Pretty much what that means is we're going to have fewer births than deaths. So if there was no migration between now and 2040, the population would go down. And some people might think, well, that's a good thing because we've seen massive migration over the last 30 years. But I think there's two key parts to this which we might want to unpick. It's the impact on the younger part of the population of migration, and then there's the older part. So if you consider the topic you've just been discussing there, Julia, in terms of we're not having enough children. Now, what you need is 2.1 children to be born per couple to replace the population. And the fertility rate is running at around 1.4. And we haven't seen that 2.1 since the 1970s. But if you just look at
we don't see that, by the way, in pretty much every Western nation now.
Not true. And if you look at some of the economic facts and figures underneath that, so in 1997, the average house price compared to your salary was 3.4.
Yeah.
Now in 2023, it's 8 times. So younger people now are delaying or cannot afford to actually buy a house. So if they're not having a house when they're younger, they might move in together a bit later, which means they don't have time to have those 2.1 children.
Yeah.
And the reason house prices has gone up so much in the last like 25, 30 years is because of the mass immigration that we've had in the past.
We have more people and pretty much the same amount of housing. We've not built anything like the amount of housing we need. But this thing, I know so many couples in their 20s and 30s who say, I mean, not people who are still living with their parents, but a lot of couples saying, you know, we're renting, we're paying an extortionate rent, we've got massive student debt, we're trying to save for a big deposit, the house prices keep going up and up every time we get close, but we don't want to start a family until we're economically secure. But at this moment, they're looking at, when am I going to be economically secure? But the economic security of the nation relies on those young people, particularly. It doesn't hurt if there are people in work having children. Rather, those kids tend to be rather more net contributors over the years than the children of people on benefits. I mean, that's the reality. That we need those couples. We need those couples to be having children.
No, definitely. And what the problem you have is, Julia, then people will call that we need more migration because we're not having younger people being born. And then that exacerbates the problem because of the house building issue. And the second problem with the figures that you'd see, Julia, is the older people. So if we go back to the 1991, there were 4 million people aged 75 and over. Now, in 2024, that's around 6.5 million. So we've seen a 50% increase since the 90s. Now, if we go up to 2040, projected to have 9 million people 75 and over. So there's the pension issue. But more importantly, we've discussed this a few weeks ago, Julia. The NHS is in crisis now. But if we can have 37% increase in the population 75 and over, and we know that older people put the demand on the NHS, are the government planning to build 37% more hospitals, 37% more NHS?
Oh, I know the answer to that. No. Yeah, I mean, that's because we don't do any planning or any of these things. But that is so crucial. It's not just the cost of pensions. It's not just the taxpayer ratio to people who are living on. And lots of people think their pensions are being paid for by the national insurance contributions when they were 23. They're not. That went on day-to-day spending all those years ago. But you say the extra cost, this is huge cost. Social care, NHS care, all of that has got to be paid for somehow. And there have to be the beds and the staff to do that work.
No, and we've seen the number of beds in the NHS fall over the last 30 years when it technically should have been rising with the stats that we've just been talking about.
But wasn't that down to keyhole surgery? A lot of treatment didn't involve. There was a routine thing. Come on, when people used to have babies, used to stay in hospital for two weeks. I left after about 5 hours.
Yeah, there is an element that care's moved on that you don't need to treat as many in hospital. But Mark Drakeford, the former First Minister in Wales, Julia, where I live, was saying a couple of weeks ago that Wales has too many hospitals. And try telling that to people when you've literally got ambulances stuck outside, can't get people into the beds. People are dying because ambulances don't turn up.
Yeah.
So the wake-up call, I think these numbers today, Julia, are saying the migration numbers might be in or out by a few, million, for example. But we know people living today will continue to grow older. The government needs to wake up, act, and start building the hospitals and the infrastructure today. Or in 2040, when the likes of you and I, Julia, are getting more towards those older ages, we'll be struggling to get the services. And West Streeting can do this now, but they won't do nothing now, Julie, because they work on 5-year election cycles. They don't care about 2040, and they need to sort it out.
No one does. Well, that's why social care reform has been kicked into the long grass yet again, and it has done by every... I can't just attack this government. Every government in the last 20, 30 years has done exactly the same. And what's so frustrating about all of this is this stuff is blatant. It's been sitting there for everyone to look at for years and years and years. And what's fascinating, until I think 3 or 4 years ago, most of our political elite were going on media, were going on about like overpopulation. Isn't it awful because of climate, etc., etc. When anyone paying attention for the last decade or two has gone, the real problem in the West is that people aren't having enough babies. And if you want to look at like, low growth right now, imagine what it's going to be like when we've only got pretty much a matching number of people in the working and paying tax with the number of people who are living 20, 30, even possibly 40 years in their pension years and needing healthcare. The numbers will not add up. We are entering dire circumstances, and I don't think any of our frontline politicians are paying attention. Do you, Jamie?
No, I pretty much you bang on there, Julia. And I think that the stark statistic you've talked about there is kind of why they want to increase the state pension age, is because we can't afford to pay for the state pension age.
Yeah, but again, raising it a couple of years doesn't touch the sides of that.
And it doesn't touch the side because it's not like a private pension where you've paid in. And remember, the government has a huge bill on the kind of the public sector pensions that need massive reform as well in terms of that. So you bang on. Politicians have not planned. The numbers are the numbers. They're there for everybody to see. It's just pure political incompetence. Absolutely. We talk about that a lot on the show. Jamie Jenkins, former Office for National Statistics statistician, he knows what he's talking about. Thank you for that. Just final word to Candace Holbert. So let's say the solution to a lot of this is being open and thinking, but also making it possible for young people to have the children they want to have. A horrible, horrible stat I was told by a guest on the show about 6 months ago. 50% of women at the age of 30 who don't have a baby will never have a baby.
I know.
But like 90% of women want to have a baby.
Yes.
That's awful. That's not just damaging to our economy. That is heartbreaking.
I know. And having children, it gives you a stake in the future. It makes you feel optimistic about the future.
It's the greatest thing on earth.
It's this long-term thing that you put so much into, but you get so much out of it.
It's the basis of society, of our wealth, of security. It's most people's happiness. Most people say their children are the thing that makes them most happy in this world. So why are we having policies that kind of deliberately push people away from doing the thing that would help everybody and them? It's madness.